CultivatED Marketer, episode 21, Brad Whitworth, Certifications, Part 2. In this episode of CultivatED Marketer, we talk with Brad Whitworth at the IABC World Conference about the importance of certifications in one's career. And folks, you'll have to listen. Some of these are not the technical certifications you may be thinking, but more strategic. Welcome to CultivatED Marketer, where we talk marketing professional development so your garden of opportunity grows. This is Brent Bowen.
And I'm Matt Tidwell.
And Matt, I missed you for part one. I ended up talking just about Springfield, Illinois and open face sandwiches that are way too caloric in part one when you weren't around, that shared experience that Brad and I had since he started his career journey in Springfield.
Former Illinois guys were talking horseshoes and things like that, right?
Yeah, talking horseshoes. But we're here for part two, and we're talking certifications with Brad because that's a lot of his expertise.
First of all, can I say just how interesting is Brad, right? So you remember that commercial, The Most Interesting Man in the World? That's kind of the way I always picture Brad Whitworth because, I've known him for a while and he's done so many things for IABC. I mean, we talk about a champion for IABC. He's done everything from host Gold Quill Awards to obviously he was on the board and he just kind of stepped now, obviously working certification that we're going to talk about. But then just his personal life, of course he owns a winery, right? Why wouldn't he? You would see that Brad doing something like that. And so I know you guys talked a little bit we talked a little bit about that in the first episode, but yeah, Brad's just a really kind of eclectic guy who's fascinating to talk to. And so glad we were able to handcuff him as we were so many others while we were at IABC, and the conversation just turned out great.
Yeah. Interesting word choice of champion.
Yeah.
Cause I've got his business card sitting right here for his winery. It's Champion Estate Vineyard. Nice word choice there, Matt.
Champion. That's right. Yeah. You're good. He's sampling though, folks. We were strictly all business. Brad doesn't carry around samples with him, but yeah, that's kind of been his newest venture. And of course, certification. And yeah, another area where Brad has really been focused and frankly, a very important focus for IABC and for everybody with professional development, because there are different ways that you can develop yourself, right? There's all kinds of on-demand content out there, sort of the basic level. You can go really a deep dive and you can get your master's degree, right? We have opportunities for that. I'd be happy to talk to you after the show. But certification sort of sits in the middle and I think is a fantastic option. I mean, I went back and got my APR certification mid-career through PRSA. One of the smartest things I ever did because I felt like, yeah, this is some validation. I really do know this stuff, right? And the work that I've been doing is now recognized in a substantial way. And of course, when you're younger, you love to put initials after your name, things like that. Now it's sort of like it's a bit more passé, but there's that piece, kind of that personal validation piece. And I know IBC has gotten very serious about certification again in the last 4 or 5 years. You talked about it a little bit with the CMP and the SCMP available. And of course, the big news now, importantly, and I'll just share this with listeners, is that, and I know we talked about it in the conversation, but World Conference was kind of end of June. There were a couple of hiccups operationally, but I can tell you now, which is really just a little bit off the schedule that they have posted, certification is definitely now available remotely. And that's as of, where are we sitting, mid-September? It's been up and running for the last 4 or 5 weeks. So you can now sign up to be certified as a CMP or SCMP and not have to travel to go do that, which of course was the old, you had to actually travel and sit for the exam. Now it's available. They call it remote proctoring. So you can just go to IABC.com and search for certification and you can learn how to take the exam from the comfort of your own home, which of course lowers a big obstacle because people had to travel that was affecting the rate or the participation rate. So lots of cool things happening in certification with IABC.
I'm sure folks, that is great news. I'm sure folks would be happy to do it at Brad's Vineyard as well, if he would do the proctoring.
Long time since I've toured a vineyard.
Yeah. I'm not sure that's an official offering of IABC at this point, but I think something we'll have to recommend to Brad. And again, that was such a striking conversation that we had with Brad too, because we talked about some of my concerns or fears, if you will, around certifications and readiness. And Brad did such a nice job in that conversation talking about really kind of stepstoning the certification based on where you are in your career too, and identifying, just even in the conversation we just had with Katie McCauley around maybe covering the basics and round one of certification, and then advancing your certifications as you move through your career, which I thought was just a tremendous point to reinforce with our audience. No matter where you are in your career, this could be applicable to you, which I thought was really important.
And yeah, I think we do touch on it, but I just want to mention the other nice thing to your point about certification. Really, IABC and APR for PRSA does this as well, and that is that you have to be recertified, right? So you have to go back, and both organizations are different in terms of how they do that. So we'll hear about that in the episode for IABC. But you have to show that you've been keeping yourself current, whether that be through attending conferences, attending PD sessions, things like that. And so I think that's really good too, because that's really what it's all about, right? It's not just, I got my certification back in the year 2000, dating myself, but I've had to really every 3 years, I have to, fill out a report that says, here's what I've been doing to keep myself fresh professionally. And so that I'm able to keep my accreditation. If you don't do that, you risk losing it, at least with some organizations. So glad to hear that IABC has a robust recertification process for those folks who were certified as well.
Which is probably a nice segue into some opportunities locally that we know from a professional development standpoint they're coming up. You want to go ahead and mention Social Media Club of Kansas City. So one of the folks you and I saw at the last Social Media Club event, Allie Trost,
right,
is actually one of the most wanted fundraisers for this year. She's trying to raise $1,000, I believe, for Big Brothers Big Sisters as part of that fundraiser. So we'll include a link maybe in the show notes for that, just on her fundraising page, since Matt and I saw her out and about, and hopefully she's a future potential guest here for the show. And speaking of fundraising, I want to thank folks. I know I'd mentioned it here on the show for the work I was doing at Walking and Rolling. That fundraiser has passed, but if anybody, and I know Matt contributed to the campaign, thank you, Matt, that I actually hit my goal of $2,000, just went north of my goal of $2,000. And I know that organization, Walking and Rolling, hit their match, which was a huge get for them. So for folks who may have not heard that episode, Walking and Rolling's a Kansas City-based nonprofit that they serve the entire United States, that help develop custom-built Halloween costumes for kids that are in wheelchairs and walkers. So we're hitting that season almost to Halloween, and they're going to be working on twice as many costumes as they had in years past, thanks to everybody that contributed, for sure. So
great cause. And it's so fun that day that you posted that, because knowing the people who know you, I saw you were close to your goal on your little thermometer there. Knowing the people who know you and you're such a way that Brent will have, because of how competitive they are, this thing will go over the top. It's just a matter of when. So
yeah.
You probably felt very
I felt ecstatic. I mean, I felt ecstatic and just so grateful for the amount of people that, not only care about the organization or just learning about the organization, but certainly just the relationships I built, and that they felt that want and desire to contribute in my name, which was, I'm just so thankful for that. Well, folks, I think, Matt, that's the best note, just being grateful and thankful. We're thankful for all of you and listening in, and as well. And Matt and I won't keep you from our conversation with Brad Whitworth. He's extremely delightful conversation we had with him, and the chat about certifications. And this one I didn't put it in the last episode. I'll put the link to his Champion Estate Vineyard he's in Windsor, California. Make sure that there's some reward at the end for the conversation around certifications. Yeah, I think there are 2 points to what Brad said. One is that foundational element right there about the overall commitment to professional development. But the second part you just concluded your statement with was around the what you don't know. A lot of the folks we've talked to in this setting is marketing and communication is changing at such a pace, and an accelerated pace beyond anything that any of us could imagine, that I'm teaching science as much as I'm teaching art anymore. And that crave, that desire and crave of knowledge of what you don't know, if that's an attribute that somebody can hold, it's really going to serve them well.
Name me an industry that's changed more than our industry in the last sort of social media 15 years. I don't know that you could.
As we were talking about last night at the bar, I'm fielding questions in class around how do NFTs and blockchain and the information associated with those NFTs factor into content marketing and my blogs and my podcast and my vlogs, and how does that get integrated? And I went, whoa, I'm going to have to get back to you on that. Yeah. And I've actually pitched some NFT clients, so it's one of those things where I hadn't thought about that point of convergence, and so I'm learning from my students every day.
Well, that's one of the things that I love about sort of I'll call it the IABC package. It can be everything from when you're first getting into the industry and making those local connections and people who can sort of give you that counsel and advice and almost mentor you as you're getting started. But then there's also this professional development, either at the local chapter or if you're lucky enough to go to a regional conference or a world conference where you can hear from some of these industry experts who are like the best of the best. There's awards programs where you can sort of take your work and show it to some judges and you get feedback. It's not just I won an award or I didn't. You get some sort of point-by-point critique of the things you did well and the places where you could improve for the next year, even if you didn't win. And then there is this certification program that goes along with the professional development. So there are places you study, and then there are ways to be able to prove. And I will also tell you that we talked about moving from that Central Illinois chapter of IABC. I ended up in Silicon Valley, and it was sort of like, wow, now I'm, a much bigger market, a much bigger company. The thing that my boss said, the hiring manager, was that what set me apart from other candidates was my active participation in IABC. So like, yeah, you do your writing's just as good, maybe a little bit better than others, but what really set it apart was you were doing all this stuff at the insurance company and you were an active participant. We want people like that who've got that energy, that drive, that commitment to give to the community. And, for that, I'm sort of grateful. It wasn't you have to, but it also is the kind of things that can set you apart from other candidates. And it is competitive, as you said, Matt.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned all of those many, many benefits, Brad, of participation in IABC. And, because our show is designed for young professionals. And let's face it, right? That's a conscious decision that has to be made, right? Because these are relatively substantial investments in time and money for a young professional. But, really, you did a wonderful job of illuminating the payoff that you get from that. But it's a question we get all the time, right? Should I really pop for that IABC membership when there may be other things I can do? And there's so much professional development. For instance, it's available online.
Right.
And so I think that, this message around proving out the value and keeping that value in front of professionals, particularly young professionals who are making those decisions, I think is really important for us.
And it's all about trade-offs, too, as you're growing up. I mean, yes, limited funds, and maybe you're lucky enough to go work for a company that will pay for your membership and will support your voluntary activity where you could become the chapter president or serve as the treasurer or what have you. Maybe if it has to come out of your own pocket, you have to sit down and look, if I cut back on a couple of lattes a week, will it pay for my annual dues? Yeah. And is that the kind of career trade-off that's worthwhile for me? And it also depends on, where you are in the world. Different markets have different, sort of approaches to this. But I also think that when I also look back, IABC was the gateway for me to bigger and better things. And I sort of knew that, while that first job doing high school football and basketball in a small town was nice, the fact that I got to ultimately turn that into, visiting Japan and learning how the public relations system works there, and spending time in China when that market was opening up. And, those would not have come if I hadn't been involved in an organization, if I hadn't been doing that certification and the testing, if I hadn't committed myself to continuing to grow.
Yeah. Brent, wasn't it we had another super smart University of Missouri graduate, I think it was Jessica Best, who was talking also about, not specific to IBC, but she was talking about the leadership growth that you're able to experience and maybe try your hand at? My brain's fuzzy this morning, but you get where I'm going.
No, I believe that was Jessica, that we've had a couple of, I think, in fact, the Missouri graduates have outnumbered any University of Kansas.
We need to work on that. Let me, we've had Jessica.
It's a good thing we have a persistent presence here on the show.
That was her. But all serious, that was her.
It was Jessica. It was Jessica.
It was her point.
The conversation we were having was, and it was apropos to the conversation we were having before we hit record, was around, someone that maybe is a high achiever and seeking a leadership activity or role, and may not be able to see that in their immediate
company
role at a company, but want to have that experience and get that experience. And we were discussing with Jessica the opportunity to look at nonprofits, membership organizations, a great place to see that experience early in your career.
Absolutely. And I've said that you will get that experience in the not-for-profit, in the association, in a voluntary capacity much sooner than you would ever get it when you go to work for a larger organization. I mean, you don't walk in and instantly become a manager with a team of people reporting to you. So to hone some of those skills, to practice some of those skills. And I said, also, if you are the head of professional development for the IABC Topeka chapter, you'll probably have 2 or 3 people you're working with, and there's a president of the chapter, and you learn how to motivate and drive people around who aren't getting a paycheck and they're not really reporting to you, but you learn leadership skills, you learn how to delegate, you learn how to follow through, you learn a lot of stuff that at some point will probably be setting you apart in that company. And when you get on that team where everybody's getting a paycheck from the same place and you've got a common mission, it's sometimes even a little easier. But learning to deal with individuals and motivating them and moving things forward in a nonprofit, it's just a great learning experience. So, we didn't even mention that as a benefit. It's one where you invest your time and your energy, but you also learn. And it's also in an area where, face it, if you screw it up, it's a whole lot easier to mess it up in a
I was just getting ready to say that. We all have made mistakes around the table.
I think we were all thinking that.
Yeah.
Like who says it?
Yeah. Funny how I always go to my mistakes. But yeah, a safe environment.
A safe place to practice.
For lack of a better word, that you can kind of get that in.
Yeah, you can make the mistake, apply the learning, and not get fired as a result. Or if you get fired, it's, kind of like your shared interest group. If they don't have the firing squad award next year if that thing doesn't take off, right?
Yeah. Although Danielle's going to take my award back, she told me, but no, I'm kidding.
I did have one question just to going back on the certification, because we were talking about preparation for it, right? And you had mentioned, because all this is around preparing ourselves for different milestones and experiences in our career. And I think you've done an amazing job of showcasing what membership organizations, what networking, what continued learning can do in creating experiences. As you were talking about some of your experiences in Japan and China, I was reflecting on some of my own. But I want to go back to readiness and thinking about individual readiness, because you kind of expressed that there's no real way to prepare for the exam. So how does someone know when they're ready? I'm 20 years into my career and I'm still questioning whether I'm ready.
You're ready. Well, and the only way you really find out if you're ready is to go and do it. So there's that bold aspect to it too.
Of course, Just jump into the deep end of the pool.
Well, on the GCCC website, there are also some study aids. And again, I go back to everybody learns differently. I was also the kind of person where, as an undergrad, my thought was, I'm not going to spend the night cramming for an exam. If I didn't pick it up during the last 15 weeks, the last 4 or 5 hours and depriving myself of sleep was not a good thing. So I never crammed. I never did that sort of stuff. That being said, on our GCCC website, we have a lot of suggestions of where you might go. So everything from books. I mean, there is the IABC Handbook of Organizational Communication and the new guidebook and sort of some written materials if that's the way you learn well. One of the other things that I'm an IABC Fellow, we have been doing monthly for something like 75 episodes. So do the math. That's like, 6 years plus. Pulling together a group of 4 IABC fellows, moderated by Shell Holtz, talking about a topic. So it might be crisis communications. It might be something like technology and its impact on workforce. It may be something topical like the pandemic during the deep, dark days of this. So all of those are now cross-referenced on the GCCC site.
That's
so
great.
if you're looking for something that talks about communication ethics, and that's an area where I need to bone up a little bit before I even tackle this, it points to all the shows in which communication ethics was a topic, and you can listen to an hour-long discussion by 4 or 5 of IABC's outstanding, long practicing communications professionals. So lots of different ways to go about getting it. And there is this, go take a class if you want to, sign up for a workshop, go to a conference and do that. So I didn't study for either the CMP or the SCMP, but then I'd also had the benefit of having done ABC and passed that. And I also sort of thought a 100-item multiple choice test is probably going to be less taxing than the 3.5-hour, 4.5-hour ordeal with written, and that was like short answer, long answer, essays, and an out loud practice thing with time crunch on it too. And this one, you're allowed 3 hours to take a 100-item multiple choice, and most people, I don't think anybody has needed the full 3 hours. The best thing that we have coming up in the very near future, maybe by the time this is aired, it has been one where you had to go and take the exam.
That's right. You had to go physically to a location.
At an IABC chapter or a conference. We are about ready to launch remote proctoring of these examinations, which means you can take this at your house, in your pajamas on a Saturday morning, whenever you want to. When you're ready to take the test, you can take it, and you don't have to go somewhere to do things. So
that's going to be a game changer, because that really, I know that's been a barrier, because, as we said, some people just can't get to a location, but remote proctoring is huge.
And plus, we've been talking about the IABC tie. You do not have to be an IABC member to take this examination. Now, it is set for a little bit more senior. If you're just getting out of school, work a few years before you want to tackle this. And on the website, it also sort of recommends that you have this many years of experience before you tackle that one, and this many years of experience. And I think the goal, ultimately, we've talked about this because I've been serving on the GCCC board. After we get remote proctoring done, the next thing is probably going to be one more level, and it's going to be a little bit more aimed at that entry level, like right out of school, where maybe you don't have to have that heavy-duty work experience, but it can be more based upon principles that you studied and you learned in school and probably experienced on your very first job. So maybe not right out of the gate, but soon thereafter, we want to get you on that track to be able to use that credential to help set you apart from other job candidates in the marketplace.
Great. That's great. And we'll make sure to include a link to the resources and the show notes when this episode comes out.
I'm so glad you mentioned that
that
series that the fellows have been doing, because I've listened to 2 or 3 of those, and those are, let's definitely, because those
only
are
got 70 more to watch.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, but the nice thing is, obviously, it's perfect for somebody who might want to sit for the certification exam, but there's just good stuff in there. To hear that kind of wisdom around the table, Shell and obviously now Brad and I think Mark Schumann's done a bunch of work on that as well.
When Shell's been unable to do things because he does have a real job in addition to his IABC, because that's the other thing that we all do, is that I end up being the substitute moderator. So I've learned how to do the StreamYard program that we're using to air this thing. And we actually went from audio only to now everybody's live on camera, so you get to see people. So when you're also moderating, you're also a technical director and a producer. And so pushing some buttons there and remember some stuff from the broadcast skills. So it's fascinating to me also just to see how something that you studied in school, you may not use it in that first job or the second job, but all of a sudden it's a needed and necessary, skill to add. And I would also challenge people to not be afraid to tackle new technologies. And when you run into something like Shell Holtz, who's like the guru on IT within IABC, he's always saying, "Hey, Brad, have you tried this new thing, Beams? I've tried it. I'm inviting you to be a part of it." And I'm like, "Well, what is it?" But don't be afraid to try some of these things and see if while many of them are for sort of that consumer application and your personal life, is there a way that same thing is going to make its way into your corporate environment, the company that you work for? Is this a tool that's maybe not that specific application, but something like it could be useful in helping shape your communications program for your employees or for your customers or your partners downstream?
You're living that right as we speak. This very act, we're doing a podcasting circa 2005. Everybody thought it was people in their pajamas in the basement with no corporate application. Fast forward 17 years and it's one of the fastest growing mediums, So it's definitely apropos. And I know Shell was talking about metaverse, and I'm on a couple other organizations where we're talking about the metaverse and how that's going to converge into business applications. Yeah. So it's definitely going to be there.
And I think that's also one where perhaps students and people in their early stage of career have a leg up because they've only grown up in a world surrounded by some of the technology that might be a little bit more difficult for me to tackle. Although I don't go and stand in line and camp out overnight for the latest phone to be introduced to the market, but I'm also not 5 or 6 generations behind. I tend to like to be on top of it and try different things and experiment because, again, that's one more of those learning things.
You have some cred, Brad. You just threw out StreamYard in a conversation. I was teaching class on StreamYard last night.
Yeah, well, but I also hang on to some things too. Maybe do you remember Foursquare?
Oh, yeah.
That turned into Swarm, and so
or MySpace.
Well, I think I'm through
Alphabet
Swarm.
soup.
I'm the mayor of my dry cleaner and of the the local grocery store and the gas station when I go there. So
I actually kind of miss Swarm. I'm going to be honest.
Well, it's still there if you really want to use it, and you can quickly rise through the ranks and get points. But I also have no idea what you do with the points that you accumulate. It's there's no value to them.
Somebody
either,
could buy me a beer with this. Yeah.
Sometimes mindless distractions are good. Well, Brett, you've been very generous with your time, and I just want to say again, we are blessed at IABC, but a lot of professional organizations are this way, but certainly at IABC with a terrific group. And we mentioned some of the names of fellows, and Brad is a guy that has just answered IABC's call at every turn, and really we've relied on him down through the years and continue to do so. And so, Brad, thank you so much for just spending a little bit of time with us, and congratulations on your 41st World Conference.
Yeah.
And I know we'll be seeing you next year as well.
Yeah. Because, and I was going to say, I hope you enjoy the rest of it. You will be hearing from me again, not on this show, but I am one of the little things that I volunteered to do to put the broadcast part to work was the voice of God.
Yes.
So
you've been our voice of God for a while, and you did that very well.
Yeah. So it's that, ladies and gentlemen, in just a few minutes, our program will begin.
Yeah. Brad can quiet a room better than anybody I've seen, so that's another skill he has.
Brad, it was so great to have you on the show. Really appreciate you sharing your insights, some background on the certification process, and then just professional development and the benefits, all told, with IBC and any organization on continued learning. Really appreciate you being with us.
Thank you. And I will also say, this is sort of a challenge I throw out to anybody who's listening, especially students. If you want to, connect with me on LinkedIn, start to build that network, because when you start looking for, Brad knows so-and-so at that company, maybe he can broker an introduction. So the challenge I'll toss out to people who are listening is find Brad on LinkedIn, send him a note, get hooked up, make that connection, because who knows, that may be the secret to unlocking the next step in someone's career. And I'd love to be able to help people move forward in this industry.
So you heard it here, folks. Brad's LinkedIn link will be in the show notes, and he's challenged you to reach out. I will beat you all to it, but we encourage you to do so. Brad, really appreciate you being on.
Thank you both.
If you found value in today's episode, check us out on our website, CultivatedMarketer.com. You'll also be able to subscribe to us, rate us, and leave us a comment on your favorite podcast platform, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Remember, a garden of opportunity grows with Cultivated Marketer.